Good morning, Ed. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks, Stephanie. Very good. Thank you.
Good, good. Thank you for joining us for this. We're obviously here today to talk about the coronavirus and sort of specifically the JobKeeper package and kind of the way that small businesses can respond to this and sort of the way that I guess some of the tactics that they can employ to manage this completely unprecedented situation as best they can. So we have with us everyone, this is Ed Mallett, Managing Director of EmploySure. And EmploySure is a specialist workplace relations consultancy working with businesses in Australia and New Zealand. So obviously this is something that Ed's been dealing with quite a lot in the past couple of weeks. Ed is a former employment relations barrister who moved to Australia from the UK back in 2010. Finding himself sort of frustrated with a bit of an antiquated legal model and high fees, he came to sort of shake that up a little bit and change things. Founded EmploySure in 2011, and it's now the largest provider of employment relations and workplace health and safety services in Australia. Ed, would you like to introduce yourself and sort of talk us through a little bit?
That sounded like a good summary. I just do a couple of shout outs. I notice Bill C has said that the parliamentary debate on JobKeeper is going on as we speak. So I'm first of all, mixed feelings, pleased that so many of you have logged in. Although I have to say, if you were willing to sit through a parliamentary debate in preference to watching this, I'd be slightly worried about the allure of what we're about to say. Hopefully we can give some more straightforward answers about what they will be debating right now, pending what I hope is a piece of legislation that comes out today. The second shout out, I had a message this morning, a message of support from one of our first ever clients, company called Executive Security Solutions, a fantastic growth company in Melbourne in the security industry, who says that they're watching. So just hello to them. They've been a great supporter of ours over the years. I've no doubt they're pretty busy at the moment. Interestingly, you're getting the way this crisis is impacting us all in one way or other. But there are businesses out there that are seeing an uptick in work, like security. You'll see that different organisations are needing additional security to do things like ensuring that they don't have too many people in their premises at any one time and so forth. So there are some quite interesting business stories coming out of this. But at the heart of today, and I suppose just to finish on the introduction to myself, is that I'm also a small business owner, and hopefully what I'll do today is talk to that and what we're doing as a business to work through this crisis, and how that interrelates to how we're dealing with our own staff challenges, and how that might help you, I suppose, in understanding what to do with yours.
Great, thank you. Sorry, excuse me. Yeah, just to pick up on that point of yours, of that you're sort of yourself running a small business at the moment. I think completely understandably, there's a lot of business owners that might be feeling like a little bit confused, a little bit baffled, and sort of they're in completely uncharted territory here. So as a business owner yourself, like how have you been sort of getting all your ducks in a row and kind of working on getting into a mindset from which you can actually sort of start to approach this crisis in the best way possible?
Really good question, Stephanie. I think you can probably just see over my shoulder, sorry, that I've got a big empty office out there of people that are no longer working here but are working at home, as I suspect is the case for a number of people, if that's possible for their particular business. But at the same time, to flag, I'm also in the office here, which is one of those classic myths at the moment, that you have been stopped from working in some way. And coming to, therefore, what I've been doing, first and foremost, I've been trying to cut through the noise to ensure that I'm planning my actions as a business owner and manager, so that we're not doing the time, not just pause and sort of step back from how I've done that. So I like a lot of you, I was in denial about the whole COVID-19 situation as recently as 2 weeks ago, to be honest. It's amazing to even think that. It feels like 2 years ago, but it was probably no more than 15 days ago. And I very clearly remember going for a walk with a mate of mine who runs a business as well, and him sort of giving me a proverbial kick up the behind and saying, snap out of it, stop pretending this isn't happening, stop saying this is no more than a bad flu, I don't know what all the fuss is about, and shaking hands with people and being almost a denier. He said, that's not the job of a business owner or manager. The job is for you to manage the risk that is ahead of you. And I think it's a fair point. It's something I repeat to myself most mornings at the moment, to be honest. I think like a lot of people, I wake up daily with a sort of disbelief that this is still going on or is real. And when I'm at my worst, I still find myself going onto online resources and clicking and looking and starting to do things like the analysis of death rates in different countries versus what happens in an ordinary flu year and all sorts of things I'm just frankly not an expert in. And shouldn't be wasting my time on, because that's not my job as a business owner. My job as a business owner is to, sounding very technical on it, but is to protect shareholder value. What that means in real terms is making sure that the business can operate throughout the COVID-19 crisis as successfully as possible. So what we did here fundamentally to sort of snap out of this this worrying mode or denial mode was to first of all drive home two mantras. So something I say to myself daily, if not hourly, is first of all, worrying is not thinking. So sitting here and panicking and thinking about whatever's just happened in the news and what I should do is not a good way of operating a business. And secondly, I bang on to myself and to the team here about a thing called teacup, which is to make sure that we're thinking clearly under pressure. So we spend a lot of time repeating those mantras, and the methodology that we've used to enable us to do that is that we've put in place a one-page, we call it a why, how, what, which is understanding our why at the moment, which is the purpose of what we're trying to do. The how is the strategy of how we're going to achieve that purpose, and the what is the day-to-day things that we're doing to manage through the crisis. So very quickly on that, our why is quite simple, to be honest. It is that we want to be running the business successfully throughout the COVID-19 crisis and beyond. That's what we remind ourselves of daily. Our how, the strategy that we're going through to achieve that, is that we are preparing for the worst, but hoping for the best. And it's as simple as that. We don't overcomplicate the strategy. Every day when someone drifts off into drama about how the world's going to end and so on, we say, hang on, that's worrying, not thinking. Let's actually do some logical preparation for the worst. What does that look like financially for us? What do we therefore need to do about it? And that drifts then into the what items, which is what we are doing day to day. And we have a pretty specific structure here. And this can work regardless of the size of business that you're running. Every morning at 8:30, we have a half-hour crisis meeting, which is dealing with all the fast-moving pieces in lots of different locations. So around Australia, first of all, but then over into New Zealand, where they're operating on a different lockdown cycle. But then that's all we deal with in that meeting. We just contain it in there, and we make sure we have a series of actions that come out of it during the day. But anything relating to that fast-moving cycle of things that are going on, we deal with in there. So that would include, for example, if someone turned up sick to work, what are we doing about that? What's the consequence of that to the rest of our workforce? The big one for us was moving our workforce home. How are we going to do that? Why are we doing it? Is the government recommending that we do it? Do we have to do it? All of those questions that we deal with in that half-hour block each morning. Then very separate to that, we have another 1 hour block that we so 2 hours a week on this, we call a planning block. And that's a very different conversation, I suppose. And that's where we're preparing for the worst. We're looking at the potential financial consequences to employ shore of the crisis, and looking at things like our cost reduction measures that need to flow from that. And in that way, we managed to avoid getting into sort of panicked thinking and rushing any cost cutting, slashing jobs or anything else that's going on, in order that we can think clearly under pressure and continue to that mantra of running the business in an organised and successful way. So there's a bit of an insight into what we're doing internally, I suppose, Stephanie.
Yeah, I think it's helpful to I think it's helpful for people just to sort of understand how one person is doing it, and then like maybe parts of that will work for them, and maybe they'll take aspects of it and add their own things. But it's good to know that everyone's sort of in the same boat, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. And look, I don't claim to be a management expert by any stretch. I'm a small business owner that's going through the struggles everyone else is, and I'm just as prone to falling into worrying as anyone else is right now. And I certainly have my days and hours where, like I say, I drift back to some online news and start trying to work out why on earth everyone's reacting in this way. And I just have to pull myself back from that. So that's just not my job. My job is to deal with the fact that outside today, there is chaos. And it is to manage this business through that chaos to protect shareholder value. And that's what I've got to do. As I say, I'm no management guru. I'm no sort of poor man's Tony Robbins or anything like that. That's just what we're doing here.
Yeah, great. So over the past sort of week or so, there's been a lot of talk about the government's JobKeeper wage subsidy package. And as was mentioned a little bit earlier, obviously we're hoping to get a bit more information on that imminently. But for now, I guess we can only talk to what we know. So as it stands, can you give us an idea of sort of what that scheme offers for employers and sort of maybe what the eligibility criteria is?
Yeah, I can. It's something that we've had to be on top of for our clients, also for ourselves. I think the first thing to say is that one of the things that was a big area of confusion when this first got announced a week or so ago was an immediate view from small businesses that was it. It was available. There it was. The government didn't sort of say, look, this is an idea that we're going to seek to legislate in 10 days' time. They simply said, there's this thing called JobKeeper. Ta-da, you're going to get $1,500 a fortnight per employee if you're eligible. And it was as vague as that, and it sent people into a bit of a tailspin. My worry is that it actually sent people into, going back to that crisis management process, that they went into worry, not thinking clearly under pressure, making promises to employees that ultimately they're not going to find out until today at the earliest whether they can keep. So right now, as I understand it, there is a sitting in Parliament where they are debating the concept of JobKeeper. I hope that that's going to be a relatively uncontested process, in that it seems that outside of the chamber there's been lots of toing and froing and negotiating going on, so that out of the end of today, or maybe tomorrow morning, we should get a piece of legislation that says, hey, small businesses, this is what you can do. Now, what I can tell you is what the government wants it to do at the moment, and where I think it will go, assuming there's not much contest on these things today. So what it's meant to be is a subsidy, not a loan. It's a subsidy to businesses of any size, but the type of business that can access it is limited by the way in which they are suffering in the crisis. So for a not-for-profit, assuming they're a registered not-for-profit, they'll need to show a 15% downturn on their income, presumably donations and so forth, from an equivalent period in the prior year. For businesses with under $1 billion turnover, it's a 30% a downturn. I'm assuming that's most people watching today. If you're over that level, then you need to show a 50% downturn. so for your Qantases and so forth. But what's then being asked as a consequence of that is, how do I show my 30% downturn? I'm a business that isn't cookie cutter shaped, and this is true of EmploySure. We're a subscription business, so we have absolutely no doubt that we're going to suffer through the crisis, but we're not seeing it today in the same way. We're actually very busy at the moment, but what we are very aware of is that our clients are small businesses who are likely to have financial constraints going forward, which may then impact us as a supplier to them. So we're not suffering a 30% downturn today, but we're pretty damn sure we will in due course. So how are we going to access that? And there's lots of other examples I've heard from businesses like, I'm a startup, I didn't exist this time last year, therefore how do I show it? Or a classic one I heard from a client yesterday was a client in Townsville who said, hey, last March, we were in the middle of floods in Townsville, and none of us did any business. So March looks much better this year, even though it's not a good March. How are we going to get it? Now, my best understanding at the moment is that because businesses are not cookie cutter shaped, the government is going to have to take quite a liberal view on this. So you will make an application online, and I think that you will be able to submit some sort of narrative, probably with the assistance of your accountant, to say this is why I should be considered for it, even though on the face of my BAS statement ending March, you won't see a 30% downturn. Mm-hmm. So that's a rough idea of the access as I understand it. As to which employees it applies to, this has been an area of contention and confusion. So if they are permanent employees, they need to have been employed on the 1st of March 2020. If they are casual employees, they need to have been regular and systematic. I'll come back to what that means in a moment, but also have been regular and systematic for a period of 12 months at the 1st of March 2020. So that's the access issue, and the reason that's been contentious is that the opposition, and more prevalently the ACTU, the peak body for the union movement, have been saying all casuals should have access to it. It's unfair to say that you have to have been working for over a year for a particular employer. That seems to have been resisted so far by the government. So it looks like it's just those types of employees. And people might have questions about, what if my person was casual for 6 months and then they became full-time on the 5th of March 2020, and all sorts of permutations like that I can try to answer when we get to Q&A if that helps. So that's which businesses can access which employees. The next big question that we've been getting is, well, when do I get the money and how? And as to that, the scheme is meant to start from the 30th of March 2020. And the way in which it seems like it's going to work is that you will continue to pay your employees either because they're still working for you, or if you choose to do so because they're on stand down or unpaid leave or some other arrangement that you've come to with them, and you would then pay them the $1,500 a fortnight, and through your single touch payroll, if you're an eligible business, it will be acknowledged by the ATO and they will pay you back in due course. The first round of payments is not going to be until May. Now, a couple of things, practical things on that. In reality, it means that businesses are going to be asked to bridge the cash flow between the ATO and their employees for at least a month. You need to consider that as a business. Can you afford the cash flow of taking part in this subsidy, even if you're eligible to it? The second point is that I don't think that this is, I'm a big supporter of JobKeeper in principle. I think it's great. We need some subsidy, but I think it only suits one particular type of business. And that's a business that is still operating, still has need for their employees to do a job, and is therefore going to get the benefit of some subsidized wages for those employees. It's basically going to make their payroll cheaper. Who it doesn't work for, I think, is businesses that have been shut down in whole or part. So classically, we've been hearing over recent weeks, things like gyms have been shut down, and pubs, for example. to then go out to those employees who have consequently been stood down and saying, at the moment, I'm legally entitled to give you nothing. But what I'm going to do suddenly, out of the generosity of spirit, because the government's got a subsidy on the go, is pay you $1,500 per fortnight out of my own pocket, and I'm then going to claim it back in a month's time. Now, any prudent business owner at this time, if you've been shut down, shouldn't be adding to their cash flow burdens. The government's response to that so far has been, go get a loan. Now, I've spoken to plenty of small business owners who are probably, maybe they're nicer people than I am, but the reality is, as a business owner, given my responsibility there is to protect shareholder value, is that I don't think you should be going out and getting cash flow loans to pay people sums of money that you're otherwise not required to pay them. They should be going off to get job seeker allowances, in my view. But that's a particular view, and some small businesses may well be saying, look, I don't share that. I need to look after my people, and I don't care if they're on stand down. I'm going to take that risk with my cash flow. Mm-hmm. So there's a bit of insight as to how it will work and the kind of problems I'm seeing as well.
Yeah, I know there's kind of a lot of different businesses in very different situations, and we're getting a few questions coming through already that are sort of talking to the sort of specifics. We will have kind of a decent amount of time at the end for Q&A, so I'll come back to them then. But I did want to pick up on one point about employees who are not permanent residents. And so for some businesses, that will be kind of people on working holiday visas or whatever, but for others, it will be people who have sort of sponsored their employees to work here. So somebody just commented here that they've kind of paid out to have these employees on board, and now they're not getting any support for them. Do you have any sort of insight into how to manage that?
I do. So if you step back from JobKeeper for a moment and look at JobKeeper as a way of subsidising what is going on generally for your business, it's not, as I said earlier on, it's not a loan. It's not a it's not a gimme for every employee. What it is that if you have employees who are either on, say, working holiday visas, or you've sponsored, as you've highlighted, Stephanie, they won't be entitled to JobKeeper. The only exclusion to that, in terms of this very narrow visas, particularly related to New Zealand citizens, they won't be entitled. So let's look at a couple of scenarios. If you're a business that needs those employees to be working at the moment, then they should be working anyway, and you should be paying them wages. And if you're doing that, then you can carry on in that way, but you're not going to get a subsidy to cover off some of their wages. So the reality, if you had two employees doing the same job that they need to do at the moment, one's a working holiday visa or sponsored and the other isn't, that one's going to be cheaper than that one. Now, pausing on that for a moment, one of the problems I'm seeing is that in reality, that makes you think as an employer, well, maybe I need to get rid of that one because that person's more expensive to me. A couple of things arise out of that. One, if you were to do that on its face, that would be discrimination. So the government is almost incentivizing you to discriminate against your employees. And what I'm really worried about at the moment, and the lawyer in me has a siren going off on my head with this, is that I don't want to see small businesses getting through this and then finding themselves subject to a raft of claims. So you think you've got through it, you're beaten and battered, you're bruised and so on, but you're up off the canvas and you're going again. Next thing you know, you get a claim land on your doorstep from someone says, you discriminated against me by getting rid of me because I was of a certain nationality. Whilst you might be incentivized to do that, you're not protected against those claims by JobKeeper. So that's one point on that. So the second point is that those people, because you're not going to get any subsidy for them, there is a chance that you therefore say, okay, I'm going to look to terminate their employment, maybe through redundancy or else how. And those people, particularly the sponsored ones on this, it's another sort of quirk of law that you need to be really careful of. If you terminate a sponsored employee, you have a responsibility under immigration law to repatriate them, particularly paying for their flight home. So there's a hidden cost there that, regardless of redundancy costs and so on, when you've got cash flow issues, if you just suddenly laid off anyone that was on sponsorship, be very careful, because you could have a bill to send them home. I don't know what that looks like if they were unable to travel home at the moment, for example. There's all sorts of risks associated with that. So be very careful. There's a real risk, I think, that because you hear from the government that you're getting this subsidy, that it entitles you to act in ways that would otherwise be unlawful, laying off people of particular nationalities or citizenship status. Then the other thing to be careful of is that what this isn't is not a sanction to underpay your staff. Just because you're only getting $1,500 a fortnight, it doesn't mean you can suddenly say to your staff, I'm only paying you $1,500 a fortnight, we still need to do a 38-hour week. So be very careful about that. This isn't a permission to act unlawfully.
Yeah, and I think it just, I mean, it feels like all of the information coming out in the government fact sheet and coming from Treasury is so confusing anyway. Like you do have to remember that it's confusing on top of all the other stuff that is also confusing.
Yeah, they're spot on. And this is where, rumor and, I was doing a live stream yesterday, and someone asked the question and said that a very popular radio show host that I won't name had just said that this was going to be paid in a certain way that seems very contrary to what I'd understood and what the Treasury has been saying. And so you've got very big voices out there that are saying things that are not fact at the moment. And the truth is there is no fact on JobKeeper at the moment. We've got to wait for the legislation to come out today or tomorrow.
Yeah. And from what we understand right now, what happens with kind of employees who have already had their hours reduced, or who've already been stood down or made redundant? Can you kind of undo that? Like, can you roll back redundancies or roll back stand downs?
Yeah, it's a good question. And the short answer is yes. So just very briefly on stand down, one of the big issues, particularly last week actually, and hopefully people are starting to understand it now, stand down is a very technical phrase that only applies to certain businesses where you've had a stoppage of work. So you don't typically have the right to unilaterally tell someone that they need to go home and not be paid if they're a permanent employee. That only arises where there's been a stoppage of work for which you can't be reasonably responsible. So classically, it's where the government has shut you down. Not you've just had a slowdown in work, which a lot of us have had. So there's been a bit of confusion about that I can answer questions on if needs be. But let's say you have legitimately stood someone down and or you've made people redundant, and you say, well, hang on a second, if I'd known about JobKeeper, I wouldn't have done that. Or I would have done that, but I want to give the stood down person the money. So looking at those two scenarios, you can go to a stood down person and say, actually, I'm going to give you $1,500, notwithstanding that you are stood down and you're not entitled to anything, and I will claim that back from the government next month. Now, the problem with that, as I highlighted earlier, is that you're essentially becoming a sort of a lender, bank intermediary between the government and the employee. So it would be out of the generosity of your own heart or some sort of social conscience, whatever it is, that would lead to you saying, I'm entitled to not pay you anything, but I'm going to give you $1,500. I've then got to wait for the government to pay me back. So that's one situation. You could, if that person has been gone on some form of unpaid leave and you actually had work for them to do, if you can pay them for it now, you could bring them back in. And this is what JobKeeper's hot off the press, really, what they're starting to say in the last 24 hours is that JobKeeper will actually allow you to unilaterally to vary the person's hours. So they might have been a full-time employee. You didn't have any work for them or enough work for them, so you asked them to go on unpaid leave. They agreed to that. You could now ring them up and say, you know what, I don't have 38 hours a week, but I've got 5 hours a week for you. I want you to come in and do this, that, and the other for me, and I'm going to pay you the $1,500 as a consequence of that. JobKeeper will enable you to do that by the looks of it, to be confirmed today. So that kind of arrangement, pulling someone back into the workforce, looks like it's being specifically encouraged. If you've made someone redundant, then yes, you can ring them up and say, well, I shouldn't have done that. Can you come back and work for me? Now, it's perfectly open to them, though, to say, no, thanks, I'll take the redundancy pay that you owe me or have paid me.
Right.
I don't want to go back on $1,500 a week. I'll take the redundancy payment. So that would be a matter of negotiation between you and the employee.
Yeah, great. Okay. And also there've been a few questions coming through about sort of part-time and casual staff. Is there sort of a maximum number of hours that those casual staff would usually work that would make them eligible, or are they just eligible no matter how much or how little hours they do?
If the business is eligible and those part-time staff worked on the 1st of March 2020 or casual and had regular and systematic hours for a year prior to that, then they are eligible whether they do 1 hour or more. One of the real oddities, in my view, about JobKeeper as it's proposed, and I'm pretty sure this is going to get passed through, is that let's say someone is actually only earning $500 a fortnight. You have to top them up to $1,500 a fortnight, regardless of the fact that they don't do that many hours for you. So essentially, they get $500 wages, and then they'd get $1,000 on top of that, which is kind of subsidy, which again, you're being asked to bridge between the time that you pay it and the time that you get it back from the government. So there's a bit of an oddity there, which I know is causing a number of our clients to think about whether they actually want to apply for this, because they might have quite big part-time or casual workforces that they say, you know what, this is going to increase my wage bill at the moment, and I might get it back from the government, but the last thing I need today is to be starting to spend more money. So that is one of the oddities about JobKeeper.
I will come back to some of the questions about JobKeeper in the Q&A session, but I'm a little bit conscious of time, so I just wanted to sort of move on from kind of the real kind of nitty-gritty and specifics of that legislation, whether it will be the same in an hour's time or not. So first of all, like we've talked a lot about kind of whether an employer is kind of whether an employee is entitled to this stuff or not, and like what's kind of up to the employer to apply for and what's not. But how can those employers sort of go about having some of these conversations with staff, and if everyone's reading the media and watching the news, and if a staff member sort of feels like they're entitled to something but actually maybe they're not, like how can employers kind of broach those difficult topics, and are there any sort of resources out there for them?
Yeah, so there are difficulties. So on a very general practical level, I'd say speak to your staff about this as much as you can. So again, reverting to what we're doing here. So I have that morning meeting, but I also on a daily basis send out communication to our staff. Sometimes I don't have much to say, to be honest, but I'm going out saying, look, this is what's happening. This is what the business is thinking about. You will hear an announcement from me on Friday. For example, on Friday here, we made a series of unstaff-related cost reduction measures. And I prefaced that during the week that I was going to announce that on Friday so that people were aware of what's going on. If we start applying for JobKeeper, then I will be explaining that to our staff. But what you'll get is, and we're seeing this from our clients, they're getting staff coming to them saying, I want JobKeeper, please. Maybe they've been stood down or on agreed unpaid leave, and they say, get me JobKeeper, I can see that it's coming. And to now, the advice has been to go back and say that actually that hasn't been legislated yet. I will communicate with you when we have an understanding as to the position, whether we're eligible, whether we will be applying. And then the key to then is regular, frequent communication to go back to the staff once we know what the law is, to say that you are or are not eligible at this time, and you will or will not be applying, and this has these particular consequences for your employees. So lots of communication. I think we've all been subject to this. You know, I've been a bit of a critic of the level of communication that we've had from our bosses, if you like, the government, in that it seems to me, whilst sometimes it's been frequent, sometimes it hasn't been consistent. And actually having it at a regular time I think the UK actually has been really good at this. They have a daily briefing at the same time every day, and that enables people to know what's going on, rather than we seem to get them at random times of the day, at random days of the week.
Yeah. Yeah, and I suppose from kind of a business owner and a boss's point of view, like, you can only pass on information when you know it. It must be frustrating being asked lots of questions that you don't have the answers to yet.
Yeah, well, I'm an ex-barrister, so I like the sound of my own voice. I don't know, I'm not too frustrated by that. But no, I jest about that. Yeah, there's lots of unknown, but I genuinely, funnily enough, through this crisis, one of the things I found helpful is speaking to our clients and to small businesses generally, because it reminds me that we're all in this. We've all got problems, and we should accept that and communicate with each other and with our staff. I'm very open with our staff about the fact that we are preparing for the worst. I don't know yet whether it will play out like that, but I'm better off getting people in that mindset now, so that if we did come to the stage where we needed to make headcount reductions, for example, then it's not a surprise to them.
Yeah, sure. And just one more from me before we move to the Q&A. A lot of business owners are understandably under more pressure than they've probably ever been before. How can they sort of balance that stress and kind of managing their own mental well-being against also making sure they're catering to the needs of their employees, and making sure that everyone feels as secure as possible while they're kind of themselves in this turmoil? Like, it just seems like an awful lot to balance.
It is, and I think if we all had an honest moment together, that we'd all say that we all struggle with it at times. I certainly do. The way I do it, I'm not an expert in this, but I'm consistently reminding myself of what my purpose is through this crisis. But my purpose isn't just towards EmploySure, and I always think of this as having you have three hats really as a business owner or manager. Your first hat is sort of your responsibility to your shareholders, which may well be you. So there's a commercial responsibility to run the business in the right way. Your second hat is the responsibility you have to your family, and then the third is the one that you have to your staff. Now, in good times, they normally all align. In tough times, you can find some divisions between those three, and you have to be very careful not to misprioritize out of, I suppose, generous emotions, and get the balance wrong as to who you're seeking to protect and who your priorities should be. Now, the law says one thing about what your priorities should be, but everyone will have their own version of that they'll need to work out as well. In that context, with my business owner hat on, and in relation to our staff here as well, I have if you like, a private persona that is maybe me slipping off the rails and worrying, and occasionally, and coaching myself back to that. I don't share that with my staff, because I don't think that's good leadership, to be sort of coming in and saying, "World's going to end. What are we going to do about it? I don't know. Help." I'm very. I try very much to keep those challenges to myself, resolve them myself, and then to go out and lead my team in a particular way. That's not to say I don't collaborate with them, but I try to wear a particular persona in leading them, which is a level of confidence that we are going to get through this. Now, how do I make sure I can keep up that persona? I have my own personal routines that I'm sure everyone else has, but I'm just trying to keep some sense of normality in the days at the moment, and keep up some exercise, and try and eat reasonably well, and keep a very structured day. I love structure personally. And I have, for example, in the middle of the day, I do a live stream with our clients and other small businesses on Facebook. I do that every day at midday. That's a new thing for me, but it's given me really good structure in my day, and gives me a really good grounding and centering mechanism to make sure that I'm not running around panicking about things. And then I have that staff email, the end of the day, and I also have that crisis meeting at the beginning of the day. So those are kind of 3 pillars that I make sure I stick to every single day.
Yeah, I think it can feel like normalcy is sort of out the window at the moment, but it can be a difficult thing to get your head around.
Yep.
Great. So we've got an awful lot of questions coming through, so I will work through as many as I can. First of all, going back to the JobKeeper package, what happens with super entitlements and like accruing leave and things like that? If somebody is not working anymore but is claiming, or the business is claiming the JobKeeper package for them, are they still accruing leave, and what's the superannuation responsibility?
So there are a few things wrapped up in that. So let's look at the different examples of who you might be getting JobKeeper for. So someone that's working normal hours or some form of hours that is over and above the $1,500 per fortnight. So you're getting a percentage of their pay back. All of what you are paying them is wages. So you should carry on paying them wages plus super in the ordinary way. So that's type of person number 1. Type of person number 2 is someone that works less than $1,500 a fortnight for you, but you're required to top them up. Mm-hmm. You would pay super on the wages up to what they normally earn, and then on the top up element, you don't have to pay super. The final group of people are people that were perhaps earning 0 because they were either stood down or on agreed unpaid leave, and you've decided to pay them the $1,500 and claim it back. So I say very generous move, but you've decided to do it. That's not wages, so you actually have a choice as to whether you want to pay super on it, but I'd suggest that you wouldn't go beyond the fact that you're already generously bridging cash flow, and you just pay the $1,500. For all of those groups, the $1,500 is gross. So it's not clear at this stage, given that some of them are not being paid $1,500 as wages, what you're meant to deduct through payroll on that. Is there going to be a special category that will come out hopefully in the legislation? And then the final part of the question was, what about accrual of entitlements? So if you are properly stood down, you accrue all of your entitlements. If you have agreed unpaid leave, subject to anything in an EBA or an award, otherwise you don't accrue entitlements during agreed unpaid leave. So there's a bit of an oddity there. And this isn't the question, I appreciate, but I have seen this question come up on the sidebar. And I think it's a really important one to shout out at the moment, is that one of the real oddities about stand down at the moment is that with 2 public holidays coming up, if your employees would have worked this Friday and or Monday, even though you've stood them down, hopefully legitimately, and you're not required to pay them during stand down, you are required to pay for those 2 days. So come what may in your payroll that's coming up, you would need to pay for Friday and Monday if that's what they would otherwise have worked, which is a real oddity. Amazing to me, because no one seems to be sort of screaming from the rooftops about this to say, guys, watch out, don't underpay your staff over Easter. Even if you stood them down, you still got to do this, because again, I just don't want to see a load of small businesses getting sued for underpayment of wages in due course. Yeah, definitely. That's an important point to remember. Also, we've had a few questions about how this applies to sole traders and directors of companies who don't typically take a wage as such. Great question. So the position on this has moved a bit. It looked at first like if you were a sole trader without employees, you could nominate yourself to get the $1,500 essentially, subject to you having the requisite turn down in business and things like that. A lot of questions came out saying, what if I'm a sole trader with employees? The answer to that is you can claim for your employees in the normal way and $1,500 for yourself. If you are a director of the business, you can also claim $1,500 for yourself plus for your employees. If you've got multiple directors or partners in a structure, you would only be able to claim one director or one partner, as I understand it at this stage.
Yes, so they have to sort of nominate a director to be eligible for it.
As I understand it, yeah. That's to be confirmed because it seems to be moving around a bit, the position on that.
Yeah. And also, my understanding is that the employer would apply for the JobKeeper for all of their employees. They can't kind of pick those that are going to be eligible for it and those that are not. Is that right?
Great question. So I've read the same thing on that, that it says if you apply for all employees. Now, I just honestly, I don't know how that's going to work. If, let's say, you've got a workforce of 10 people, let's say 5 of them, you're a restaurant or cafe, 5 of them have been stood down quite properly under the Fair Work Act because you were told you can only do takeaway. And those 5 people who were wait staff previously are at home, not getting paid, and you're allowed to do that. And 5 staff you've got working for you at this time. If you apply for JobKeeper, on its face, it looks like you have to do it for all 10 of them, and therefore you have to pay $1,500 to the people that are on 0 out of your own cash flow, plus you're going to get the recovery for $1,500 for those that are working. Now, my position is I just can't see how they can force you to pay people that you're otherwise not lawfully required to pay, nor do I see how they can force you to top people up. If they were on, say, $500 a fortnight, why should you have to top them up if you don't want to or don't have the cash flow to, but you do want the subsidy for other people? It just seems a bit odd to me. So I think that there's going to need to be some clarity around that. Also, back to your earlier question, Stephanie, like if I've got people that I'm not entitled to get JobKeeper for, like someone on a sponsored visa 457, then what's the situation there? Is saying I don't get JobKeeper for them, but I have to pay the other people, and it's a mess, frankly. And my understanding would be that you would be entitled to consider things like agreeing unpaid leave with certain people, but if you have people that you need to work, that you could get supplement for them. But that seems unclear at the moment.
Yeah, it sounds like the message there is that we just don't really know yet.
No, unfortunately, I'm sorry not to be able to be clear. I just loathe to speculate on it because it's one of those things that I logically thought that you would be able to go separate which types of employees get it, because the government can't really force you to pay money that you wouldn't otherwise pay to them. But on its face, the FAQs and so forth from the Treasury seem to say that's not true.
Yeah. There's also kind of the case of, we talked about the eligibility criteria of having a 30% drop in turnover. What would you suggest if you're a business that anticipates having a 30% drop in turnover but hasn't seen it yet, but can sort of tell it's on the cards?
Yeah, so what seems to be likely in terms of assessing the turnover drop is that they're going to use business activity statements. Now, the March quarter's just finished. Most small businesses will pay BAS on a quarterly basis. There is the opportunity to seek to go to a monthly basis at the moment, which is a two-edged sword, really. That one, it means your cash flow is going to be slightly different in terms of having to do that monthly. But at the same time, it will allow you to capture, for example, that your March was poor, but January and February might have been fine. So I'm a bit worried about it, because if they're looking at BAS statements, what they will see is the March quarter, and people might not have suffered a 30% turn down over the quarter, but they did in March. And how they're going to work that out on the face of a BAS statement, I don't know, because it's not clear from a BAS submission how that works. But in theory, it's going to be looked at on the March submission for BAS. And so let's say that you went down by 20%, but you can see quite clearly that that is an unfair reflection of the way your business is actually going. Then what you'll be doing, there'll be a mechanism for making a submission to the ATO to say, look, this 20% is not a fair reflection because And I suspect what the ATO is going to do is either come back and say, okay, fine, we'll give it to you from 30th of March, or let's have a look at this again in your next BAS statement. The problem with that, of course, is if they say, let's look at it again later, you might not be doing your next BAS statement for another 3 months. And what are you meant to do in the meantime? Are you meant to pay your employees and hope you're going to get it back? Or even worse still, pay people money that you don't have to pay them and hope you're going to get it back in due course? So again, unclear at the moment, but I've got a real worry about that where if the ATO sort of rejects you at this stage, how do you then have any confidence to do anything but lay off staff? And let's remember the objective of this is to stop you laying off staff. So what I'd anticipate you put on your submission is basically in a very non-threatening manner. If I don't get this, I'm going to have to do this with my staff. Please give it to me, essentially.
Yeah, we have had a few people kind of reaching out to us as well, saying that they're kind of operating on blind faith here, like they're having to make decisions about employees based on information that is just a little bit up in the air.
Yeah, and that's my worry is that, let's face it, like if you'd actually had a 30% downturn in March, and plenty of people watching today will have done, and it's not to undermine that, particularly if you got whacked with a shutdown from the government. But you might even be, for example, you might be a gym that has had a complete shutdown, but you've had, to date, most of your customers forgot to change their direct debits or have generously carried on paying them. But as we find out that this is a shutdown that's going to go on, you might get people that say, actually, no, I've got to change that and start cutting off the subscriptions you're receiving. And you might be seeing that happening, but it didn't happen to you in the first quarter because 2 months of the first quarter you were fine. We were all plodding along without realizing this was coming. And I'm really worried about that because that, for me, is if you get told no at this stage, what are you going to do for the next 3 months? Are you meant to just pay out with blind faith? You can't, as a prudent business owner, to be honest. You've got to say, look, I'm sorry, I've got to agree some unpaid leave with you, otherwise put you on reduced hours, reduced pay, whatever it might be. Probably the last thing you do is redundancies, just because of the cost of doing that with a permanent workforce. But it seems to be that there's a real risk that this doesn't serve purpose unless the ATO takes a pretty broad brush view on March BAS.
Yeah, and there's been this talk of the ATO using discretion, but not very much clarity around what that discretion is going to look like. So again, another thing I guess we'll be keeping an eye on.
Yeah, exactly.
There's also a kind of bit of confusion around businesses, maybe startups or like very new businesses that haven't yet got any revenue, so obviously won't meet the revenue decline criteria. Are you aware of sort of any support that's available to them?
What I've been saying to businesses in that position is that they are another type of business that doesn't fit the cookie cutter 30% mold, and that they should be applying for JobKeeper. Because again, the purpose of the legislation is to protect jobs, and if they can show that they would otherwise have had a certain level of support, let's say they might have had funding that's pulled out or something like that, then they should be able to get the ATO to exercise some of that discretion, or at least I hope the ATO uses a broad brush approach like that. But otherwise, they're going to be left with things like the additional subsidies that are there. There's this through your payroll anyway. There is this up to 100 grand that you can receive in basically credits through your BAS that should operate anyway. So your business with less than, what was it, with $50 million revenue, I think, and you if you qualify for that, you'll automatically get up to 100 grand back through your BAS. But I don't think that that's typically going to be cash payments. That's mainly going to be credits that you'll get.
Mm-hmm. Great. We've just got a few minutes left, so I'm just going to really do a bit of a quick fire round, trying to get through some of these these questions.
I'll take that as a polite hint to not be so long-winded.
No, it's detail is important as well. Is the JobKeeper payment restricted by partner's income?
No.
That was very succinct, thank you. How will the ATO assess sales in March, given that a lot of small businesses lodge their BAS on a cash basis?
So they lodge on a cash basis rather than, say, an invoice basis. So it'll just look at the BAS statement in theory and see whether it was 30% down on the year before, and subject to any submissions that you'll add to that. Say, look, this was odd because I didn't operate last year, I had floods last year, whatever it might have been. You'll need to explain yourself as to why whatever downturn is showing is in fact not the real picture.
Mm-hmm. And as far as I'm aware, we don't have any, again, that's a kind of discretionary thing. We don't know kind of what will be accepted and what won't. Mm-hmm. When the JobKeeper payments come to an end after 6 months, are you then obligated to keep the staff on board? And also, are you obligated to keep them at that $1,500 per fortnight wage?
So when it ends, my understanding is that it will go back to whatever arrangements you had before. And if you have reduced hours or anything like that, you'd need to go back to what it was before. There's not a contractual obligation or anything to keep the staff member, and vice versa if they're not obliged to have to stay with you. Although the FAQ curiously says you've got to notify the ATO if those staff members go. And I don't know why it says that. I can't see how they would reclaim any money from you, or less still from the staff member. What Scott Morrison has said is that there's some sort of moral contract to make sure that this is all about keeping people employed. But my position is, if you've got someone that's after 6 months they're no good and they're not, we're back in the old world of having to manage your business properly, and you can't just hold people because of some moral contract. Yeah,
definitely. What happens with contractors if you have a sort of long-standing relationship with a contractor, but they're not an employee?
So assuming they're a true contractor and you don't pay them through payroll and so on, then they would be applying either as a sole trader or through their PTY Limited for JobKeeper themselves if they've had a 30% downturn.
Great. So we've pretty much reached time. I will be taking note of all of these questions, and I'll send them through to you, Ed. So maybe we can sort of try to answer them through other channels.
Yeah. The other way I was just thinking, I do send them through. We'll respond to them, but also we've got actually if you're really short of things to do today, we've got our live stream at midday, and you can come and watch then and ask the same question. Maybe put it in block capitals so we hear you shouting and saying, "Just bloody answer it, Ed, this time." And we'll answer through there as well if that's of any help. So that's just on Employsure's Facebook page if people are interested.
Excellent. We will be sharing the video of the webinars. I believe that will be sent to everyone that registered. So keep an eye out for that. And also at Smart Company, we're sort of taking our reader questions as well. So if you want to send any kind of real specific questions through to news@smartcompany.com.au, we're doing our best to sort of inform our coverage through what people really need to know. And I think that's pretty much all from us. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in and for being so engaged and for throwing all these millions of questions at us. It's really helpful to know what people need to know. And Ed, do you have anything else you'd like to say before we go?
Not at all. Just really, I suppose, just say good luck, everyone. It is really a trying time for all of us. I heard a podcast the other day where someone described themselves as an Aussie battler, and that's when I think there's never a better time to be showing that spirit. And in a sort of twisted way, this is when we're tested most as business owners. So let's go and do it, guys. Let's take it on.
Great words to end on. Thank you so much, Ed, and I'm sure we'll cross paths again before too long.